Cherry Blossom had barely touched her breakfast. She had a knot in her stomach that made her feel like if she ate anything, she'd be sick. Lance was rushing around the house, gathering the last things that Cherry would need for the day. Her sandwiches, pencils, paper, books. Lance placed all these items into her new sky blue saddlebags with a red heart on the strap. Today was Cherry's first day of school, and as any filly or colt would be, she was nervous. They'd been in Ponyville for 5 days now, and everything was going well for them. Lance was working and bringing home enough bits to pay for almost anything they needed. Food, plates, cups, and other household items needed for everyday living. Though the house was still mostly bare from the lack of furniture, they did manage to get tables and chairs for the kitchen very cheap. Fluttershy had been a big help looking after Cherry while Lance worked all week. He only ever got Sundays off work, and had to use that free time to do the shopping. Cherry continued to look at her daisy sandwich as the same nervous thoughts came to her head over and over again. Lance had put the last item in her new saddlebags and then turned to her.
Okay, you're all set to go.
He then noticed that she had barely touched her breakfast.
Cherry, what's the matter? You okay?
I feel sick,
she replied quietly. Cherry never moved her head. She just kept staring, as if the food or the table in front of her wasn't there. Lance walked over and gave her a gentle smile.
Cherry, I know you're nervous. Every pony is on their first day. But you've already met Miss Cheerilee, and she was nice, wasn't she?
Cheerilee had come by a few days ago. She just wanted to drop off a list of items that Cherry Blossom would need for the first day of school. The school teacher was nervous of the forest, that was clear, but when Lance invited her in for tea, she graciously accepted. She was a good, kind-hearted mare, and Lance knew she'd make sure Cherry was looked after in school.
Do I really have to go?
Cherry asked, turning to look at Lance.
Yes, every pony has to when they get older. Eat a little more. You'll feel better.
Lance gave his little sister a quick hug, but as he pulled out of it, Cherry grabbed him and pulled him back into it. They stayed like that for a short while, Cherry never wanting to let go. Lance then glanced up at the clock.
Cherry, it's time to go.
The school bell rang, signalling the start of the school day. Fillies and colts that were playing around the playground now picked up their saddlebags and ran into the classroom. The school was a large red building that looked like it could have once been a small church, with a bell tower above it. Cheerilee was stood at the doorway and she waved a hoof at Lance and Cherry, who was wearing her new saddlebags. Lance returned the wave, but Cherry barely moved.
I don't want to go. I want to stay with Fluttershy.
Lance looked down as Cherry started tearing up. He got down to eye level with her.
Cherry, I know school can be a very scary experience when you first go. But let me tell you something. You're going to have lots of fun here. You'll make new friends learning together, playing games at break times. And you'll have a great teacher who will be there for you should you ever have any problems.
Cherry didn't look up at Lance, her own fears weighing too heavy on her mind. She heard hoofsteps. Lance and Cherry both looked and saw Cheerilee as she approached the school gate where they stood.
Everything okay?
Yeah, she's just incredibly nervous.
Well, don't worry, Cherry. We were all nervous on our first day of school.
Cherry looked down to the ground. Lance had already told her that, but it didn't help. Lance leaned in close to her.
Cherry, do you remember why I had to leave school early?
It was because Dad told you to?
Not exactly. I did it for you.
Cherry looked up at her brother.
It was so I could keep a roof over your head and put food in front of you, so that one day you could go to school, have a good education and a better life.
But what if he comes while you're gone?
She said that a bit louder than she intended. Cheerilee looked confused at this, and Lance gave her a sideways glance. He hoped she wouldn't bring this up later.
Is this why Cherry's so nervous?
Cherry had felt safe with her brother, and with Fluttershy, but here at school, she trusted no one.
He won't. He's not coming back. And Miss Cheerilee will look after you until I arrive after school to pick you up. Won't you, Miss Cheerilee?
Cheerilee nodded. She wasn't sure what the full story here was, but she knew that Cherry Blossom needed to feel safe.
Of course I will. Just like I would any of my students. I promise you, This is a safe environment. Now, we really do have to get inside. Class has already started.
Cheerilee gave Cherry a confident smile. Lance then gave his sister another hug and then gently pushed her to Cheerilee. They both walked down the school path and arrived at the classroom, Cheerilee offering what encouragement she could. Cherry looked back to her brother, who waved a hoof as she entered the schoolhouse. Most of the students were sitting down and talking loudly. A few others were still playing around as Cherry Blossom walked into the room. She instantly felt the eyes of a few students turn to her, and then heard them as they pointed her out to their friends.
Okay, everypony, let's take our seats.
The foals out of their seats all rushed back and all fell quiet.
Now, today I want to continue our talk from last week about the study of plant life. But first, I want you all to welcome our newest student, Cherry Blossom.
Cherry kept her head down as she felt the eyes of every pony looking at her. She wished she could just turn invisible and hide. A few students said hello, but she wasn't looking and didn't see which ones those were. It sounded like a murmur to her. Cheerilee then whispered to Cherry to go have a seat. She looked up and saw a seat at the very back. She headed towards it and Miss Cheerilee began talking about something called homework and review of plants. Cherry placed her saddlebags under her desk and then sat down. She risked a glance around her and saw every pony was focused only on Miss Cheerilee. Cherry then looked towards her too. She was talking about plants found around Ponyville and how they grow. The pink filly then saw on the chalkboard a picture of a calla lily, just like the one in her front garden. Cherry had been trying to look after it, keeping it watered, pulling away the bad weeds, but they kept coming back, and the flower itself didn't seem to be getting any healthier. She'd even cut herself on a thorn once. Cherry quickly reached into her saddlebags and pulled out some paper and a pencil. She copied as much information down as she could. Her big brother had taught her how to write back in the late nights when they lived in Las Pegasus. He had taught her so much while she should have been in school, but instead was kept home. She believed that Lance could just keep on teaching her from home, but even he didn't know about plant life. There was a lot he missed out on from leaving school early. Cherry finished copying down all the information on the calla lily and then looked at the next flower. It was a pretty red rose. She thought it would look lovely in their garden, and she began copying down the information for that too. Then the flower after that, and then another. Cheerilee was talking about how the different flowers also had medicinal uses, but Cherry was purely focused on what their home would look like if she made a garden with all different types of beautiful flowers. Suddenly the bell rang, and every pony put their things away. Cherry wasn't sure what was going on. She just remained seated for a moment watching the others. Two colts then began talking loudly to her right.
Come on, Snails! We gotta get to the seesaw before any pony else!
Hold on, I'm coming. Wait up, Snip.
The two colts then ran out of the door. Cherry watched them leave and then saw Cheerilee was walking over to her.
It's recess time, Cherry. Aren't you going to go outside and play?
Cherry hadn't really thought about it.
Go on outside. Just leave your things here. I promise they'll all be here when you get back.
Cherry slid down from her desk and without a word went outside. It was a little cloudy this morning. The sun had been shining all week, so rain would have to come soon to balance it out. She walked among all the other screaming foals as they laughed and played together. Cherry saw a pair of fillies on the swings and it looked fun. She hadn't been to a playground before. She watched as the two swung higher and higher. One of them was yellow with a long red mane tied back by a large red bow. The other filly was orange with a scruffy purple mane. Cherry saw how they swung their hind legs in front of themselves and then tucked them under the seat as they went backwards. The two fillies jumped off the swings a few moments later, and the orange one got significantly more distance than the yellow one, since she had used her wings for an extra push.
Hey! You cheated!
The yellow one shouted. The orange Pegasus looked back with an annoyed face.
What? I didn't cheat! Yes, you did! Y'all used your wings!
The orange Pegasus looked back at her wings as she flapped them quickly.
Yeah? Well, you never said I couldn't use them! I didn't think I needed to tell you to play fair. You're just like Greenwood Edge when she cheated to beat my sister. She didn't cheat! And she never needed her wings anyway!
They both walked off, continuing their argument as a third white filly, a unicorn, ran up to them and tried to stop them fighting. The swings were empty. Cherry went over to them, sat down and held onto the ropes. The pink filly thought about how to use the swing and pushed herself backwards a few steps. She lifted her hooves off the floor and she swung forward. Cherry then kicked her legs backwards and began to swing. But before she had a chance to kick forwards again, some pony shouted at her.
Hey! What do you you're doing?
Cherry planted her hooves onto the ground and looked at who the voice was coming from. 2 other fillies were standing right behind her. If she had swung backwards any further, she would have hit them. One of them was dark grey with blue glasses and a light grey mane with a braided ponytail. The other had a white mane with a purple streak and a tiara on her head. Cherry also noticed that her pink coat was just like her own. The pink filly looked at Cherry with annoyance.
How dare you cut in front of us? We were next to use the swings.
Cherry was positive that neither of these girls were stood there before she got to the swings herself. Cherry jumped down quickly and stepped away from the pair.
I'm sorry,
You better watch yourself. This is our playground. When you see us coming, you leave. You got it?
Yeah, got it?
Cherry backed away from them both, walking away from the swings and doing her best not to cry.
Hey look, she's crying.
They both laughed, and now she actually was crying. She couldn't hold the tears back any longer. She covered her face as they laughed and poked fun at her.
Come on, Silver Spoon. Let's swing before recess is over.
Right behind you, Diamond Tiara.
The 2 bullies then sat on the swings. They began to swing back and forth, leaving Cherry Blossom wiping her eyes. She hated it here. She wanted to go home and never come back again. Cherry Blossom walked over to the classroom, hoping that maybe Miss Cheerilee would let her spend the rest of the recess inside. Just then the class bell rang, and Cherry was the first pony inside. She sat down and stared at her desk, not looking up from the papers in front of her, not even focusing on them. She just wanted to bury herself in her saddlebags and hide away till her brother came to pick her up. Cherry didn't pay much attention in class for the rest of the day. Cheerilee had asked her to stay behind after class. She wanted to know if she was okay, but Cherry wouldn't talk about it. She didn't want the horrible fillies to have a reason ever again to bully her. She went outside and walked over to her brother, who was waiting by the gate.
Hey, Cherry. How was your first day of school? Wasn't as bad as you expected, right?
Lance asked with a smile, but it quickly faded as she walked right past him.
Cherry? Cherry, what's wrong?
Just take me home.
The little filly screwed up her face, holding her eyes shut tightly. She'd been holding tears back all through class, and now the floodgates opened and she couldn't stop them. Lance's heart was breaking at the sight of this. He leaned down to hug her and console her, but as she felt him, she shook him off and ran off towards home. Lance looked back towards the school and saw Cheerilee standing at the doorway. Even from this distance he could see her concern. What Lance didn't see, watching from behind the schoolhouse, were 2 little fillies laughing, proud of themselves.